Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Sales Development Podcast, powered by Tenbound, hosted by David Dulany. My name is James Bott, and here to introduce episode 190, featuring Nigel Green, consultant, author, podcast host, and David kicks off the episode by asking Nigel how he got started in sales and the journey of how he became who he is today, somebody that's so deeply entrenched in the sales profession. Nigel and David talk about the reality of being a consultant as the episode continues, and Nigel shares how he builds relationships with key stakeholders at each of his clients and how he works with teams and really breaks down what he goes through and how he needs to build foundational relationships throughout each of his clients. Super interesting, and should make anybody questioning whether or not to work with a consultant feel great about Nigel's point of view on it. As the episode continues, Nigel gives some really tactical feedback on what actually and consistently works in cold outbound outreach. So if you are currently listening to this episode and you are tasked with doing cold outbound, get your notes out right now, because Nigel is dropping some real gems in this episode. And as the episode wraps up, David and Nigel talk about what makes a successful salesperson. Things like experience, things like cultivating ways to always get better, and how Nigel sees the growth of successful salespeople through the different work that he does with all of his different clients. Finally, as a special treat, Nigel does let us in on a way to get his new book for free. So you definitely want to listen all the way through to the end of the episode. Leave us a review, head over to tenbound.com to hear more episodes of the Sales Development Podcast, and as always, enjoy episode 190 with Nigel Green.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Sales Development Podcast. I am joined today by a good friend of mine and top performing sales consultant, writer, and thought leader in this industry, who is going to school us on sales development today. So I'm excited to talk to Nigel Green. How are you doing today, sir?
I am well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We were talking about, some of the trends in the sales development world and, how we can potentially improve performance before the show. But first and foremost, how did you get into sales and build up this practice that's thriving today, writing books and helping people with their sales performance?
Well, I think Louis Pasteur said it, chance favors the prepared. And I think that's relevant for me because I did not choose sales. I just was able to capitalize on what a beautiful and compelling career sales can be for anyone. So I was a college athlete. I played football, and that anyone that plays a sport at a high level knows that you just have to be able to manage a lot of competing priorities. And it's a real exercise in humility and knowing that you're just not that good. There's always someone that's better. Everything that you do can be replaced by the next person in line. So a function of success is being prepared so that when you get your chance, you're not nervous, you know what to do, you've thought through all the potential scenarios. And a lot of that maps really well to being a sales professional. And so I right after college, went and started working in sales. And it just so happened to be that it was healthcare. Again, another one of those situations where I was too dumb to know that healthcare sales, of all the things you could sell at the time, this is 2006, happened to be one of the more lucrative career paths. And so I was always an okay seller. I typically would always hit my number. I've been on performance improvement plans in the past, which is one of the questions I ask my clients before they put someone on a PIP is, have you ever been on one of these before? I was always great. I was never a rainmaker, but realized that when it came to just motivating a team or thinking about the salesperson's perspective and how to get the most out of someone, a lot of my sales managers just sucked at that. They just weren't very good. And so I said, you know what, there's got to be a better way to lead teams. Like, nobody wants to join a Friday afternoon meeting. This is dumb. What's wrong with this guy? And so I just really had a heart for wanting to lead teams differently. And so that's really where I started to shine, Dave, is leading sales teams. I had my first chance to lead a sales team in 2009. And 3 years later, I was one of, I don't want to sound like I was like the sales leader. I was one of a few sales leaders, but we sold that business to Medline for right at $1 billion. And then when I left Medline in 2012, I joined a company called Foundations Recovery Network and that was my first opportunity to build a team from scratch. And we went from 0 reps to close to 50 reps, and we were doing almost 50 million in revenue. And we sold that business for almost 10 times revenue in 2015. Since then, I've been working with mostly healthcare companies that have a sales team, have a B2B strategy, and they can't afford to miss a number. They've got an equity sponsor, or they've got some type of, investor backing that wants to get out of that business in 3 to 5 years. And so growth is the name of the game, and any hiccup along the way is unacceptable. So that's what I do now. I work with management teams that, have a complex sales team, typically sales development, and they've got inbound, they've got account managers, they've got national account reps, they've got different layers of management, but one thing's the same: we can't afford to miss a number.
That's really interesting. So when you come into a company, where do you start? Where do you start with the sales team? Because you mentioned, especially management, there's not much training out there for managers. There's not much coaching for the coach, and they kind of have to go in and wing it a lot of the times. So that's one thing that I think is a huge, advantage for looking at it from a high level. But when you start with a company and you go, okay, we need to get this profitable within 3 to 5 years, where do you start?
So it's a great question. And I'll set it up with an analogy. They say the average millionaire has 7 revenue streams or 7 income streams. Well, I think about a business as a path to being like, if this business was a person that was a millionaire that had at least 7 income streams, what are the income streams of this business? And what I end up finding, Dave, is that they run 1 or 2 or 3 plays really well, and they're struggling at other plays. And when I mean play, like they may have the SDR to AE, they may have that SaaS model down and nailed, but they don't do channel partnerships. They hadn't even thought about it. Or they don't have an inbound machine that allows for a customer to do a transaction without having to even speak to a human, or get further down the funnel without having to speak to a human. So I think about, okay, if the average millionaire has 7 income streams, this company has 3. What are all the ways that your ideal customer might want to transact with you? So we begin assessing not the sales process, but the buyer's journey. What's the customer sentiment? How does each ideal customer bump into you, right? So where are they hanging out? What are the traffic sources? And have we built our digital onboarding, or even our off digital onboard, all the different ways? I mean, for some companies, it's just putting up more back of bench signs around buses where patients get on the bus to go to treatment. Right? So it could be things like that, things that are kind of like you wouldn't think about it. But again, it's assessing customer sentiment and then mapping all of your different sales processes to the customer sentiment and the way that they want to do business with you. So then once you do that work, it becomes really clear that, well, you've got a management team that is measuring the wrong activities, or putting too much emphasis on an activity that's a very low value, low return on activity. And so we begin to start aligning the roles and responsibilities, and then the expectations of each roles and responsibility around getting traction in more channels so that we can map multiple sales processes to different buying experiences based on the way the customer wants to do business.
Wow. Okay. So I'm still stuck on that millionaire thing. 7 lines of, income streams. I got to get to work here. Okay. So
we all do.
Yeah. Let's go. 7. Wow. Okay. So there could be multiple opportunities, and a lot of times companies don't see that. So I'm interested though, you start with the buyer sentiment, the buyer journey. And do the companies ever come back to you and say, why are you starting with that? We just want to know how to sell more.
All the time. All the time.
Just tell us how to sell more. I don't care about how people, that's marketing. That's not sales or so, do you ever hear stuff like that?
without exception. I mean, it's the first thing, and I even get in front of it. I say, you're hearing me say that we're going to start with the buyer's journey, and you're going to tell me, well, that's a marketing thing. We already have a sales process. It works. And I say, so let's go ahead and have the conversation now about why we're going to do this work, because your marketing team doesn't sit in on any sales calls. Are you with me? And they're like, yeah, you're right. They don't do that. Okay. Your sales process was built by a sales leader 3 years ago that's not here. So when was the last time it was inspected? Well, that's a good point. We haven't done that in a while. We had this black swan event in the last 18 months that totally changed the way business as usual was done. You with me on that? And they're like, yeah. Okay. So you think it's worth spending a few hours thinking through your ideal customer, looking through your data, the customers you have, the prospects you would like to do business with, and getting really clear on how they want to do business. And what we end up finding are things like, well, you've got a business that's SaaS business or whatever that's driven by a contract, but you've got no risk mitigating step in between where there's a proof of concept or there's a way to demonstrate value before I sign the dotted line. Well, we live in a world where nobody's signing long-term contracts unless you can show them the value on the front end. So that's a huge problem in your sales process. You thought about, well, we never thought about that. So it's little things like that. But yeah, it's always met with some sense of resistance. And it's not resistance to the idea. And it's the same thing that you face with your customers. When customers push back, the resistance is not to the opportunity, not to the exercise, it's to doing something different. And so we got to help them figure out that what you're asking them to do while it's different may not be hard and it may not take a long time. And so understanding how to just meet them where they are on that resistance spectrum and being their guide and saying, so it's no different for a seller that's listening to this. I have to do the same thing, is to say, I understand why this feels like it's elementary or it's beneath you. Let me tell you what's in it for you.
Right. And so when you unpack that a little bit for them, and then you start to notice things, are there issues with their core processes? Because it seems like you'd want to get the core down and make sure that it's really sound, and then start to add, some of the potential, other revenue stream sales processes to that. But I mean, sometimes is it just like you look at the core thing and it's just a complete mess?
Sometimes, Dave, it's that the process is fine. You just don't have the right people to do it. Okay. And let me give you an example of that. So I have a client that grew revenue 533% through COVID.
Wow.
But when March of 2020 happened, now this is a healthcare company, so their sales reps were used to being at the hospital, at the surgery center with the customer. That was the way it's been done forever. It was immediately impermissible for them to show up at the hospital. Customers didn't want to see you. They're overwhelmed with patients. I mean, they're pulling people to go be on COVID wings, and they're just forget about it. So we had to re-engineer their team altogether. We didn't have to change the sales process. We had to change the medium. We switched to a completely virtual. So all of the stages, what I mean, we didn't have to change the process. What I mean is that stage by stage, the way we measured deals by stage and days in stage, none of that had to change. We just had to train and hire around the ability to do those activities in Zoom, on a phone call, and not in a human environment. And what we found is that some of the reps that had previously been core performers, meaning that they were always, 75 to 90% to plan, were immediately top performers. And some of their legacy rainmakers struggled with technology and just weren't going to be successful in the role. And so a lot of tough decisions were made, but it changed the anatomy of the person doing the activities. And then from there, it was all gas.
It's crazy. I mean, so, when I was in the corporate world, if you heard about the consultants, right? The consultants are coming in, everybody would kind of tighten up a little bit, because that's what happens a lot. You sort of unpack this and you realize hey, the market has changed or the customer has changed, but our people are still the same. And do you ever run into, I mean, either from the executives that you're dealing with or the salespeople that they're kind of like a little defensive or, hey, this is Nigel guy.
Yeah, but I think it's part of the territory. And we said this before we hit record, is that I work 90% of the time with a sales leader. So that's someone in the chief revenue or chief of sales, VP, director of business development title. Without exception, it's the CEO that hires me. I don't have sales leaders that hire me. It's always the CEO. And so the first thing that I have to do is disarm the sales leader who's wondering, is my job on the line? Or why does my CEO not think that I'm a competent sales leader? And the truth is that if you look at, I like to look at sport because I played sport. If you look at any top golfer or any top football player or baseball, whatever sport you like, it used to be that they always had a coach. They had their team coach, but now and that could be your CEO, right? If you think about your coach, your designated coach, that might be the CEO or the COO. But then they have all these other coaches that they hire and pay for themselves, like a dietitian, and then a sports psychologist, and then a mobility coach and a strength coach. And golfers have a swing coach, and quarterbacks have, a throwing coach. They invest in all of these different inputs and expertise to help them stay at the top of the game. And so it's no different. And I just tell the sales leader, I'm not ever going to meet with your team without you. I'm not going to talk to the CEO about you without you in the room. I'm here for you. The reality is you want to be elite. I know that, but I don't know anyone that's reached the top level, the pinnacle of the sales leadership career, that doesn't have input from multiple advisors and consultants that are out seeing other parts of the world while you're busy being heads down in this one business, in this one industry. If you want to be elite, you have to have a broader, more global perspective. And it's really hard to do that and be excellent at the nuances and specificity of leading this sales team in this industry for this company. So do you really want to be elite? And then when you map it that way, they go, oh yeah, it's not so bad.
100%. And I mean, that's such wise words that if you want to get good at something, look at the best people in the world. They always are surrounded by, consultants, coaches, trainers, nutritionists, massage, people, all that stuff, as much as you can afford, right, to get you better. And I just think in the corporate world, it's a little bit different because I think you have, and the way that you said it, you have to overcome some initial resistance that might be there. But, I remember when I was in the corporate world, I always had that feeling, but one of my managers always had consultants coming in, agencies, consultants, trainers, and, he just kept getting better and he was more successful and he was better. And all of a sudden the light bulb turned on. Hey, these people are here trying to help, they're trying to help me get better. So
it's interesting, you point to one problem that I see, and for the CEOs that are listening to this, lean in for this conversation. When you think about the budget that you've dedicated to sales training or sales consultants, I'll argue that there are probably a few exceptions, but for the majority of companies, 90%, and sometimes it's probably even bigger than that, 90% or greater of your training dollars and consulting dollars is for your frontline sellers, and you're leaving your management team on an island. And there is a whole unique, discrete set of skills that are required to lead a sales team that just aren't innate, and they don't get developed just because you gave them a title. And because they were good at sales doesn't mean that they're going to be good at coaching top performers or helping you, the management team, think through the ways in which the product needs to evolve to maintain some sense of competitive advantage, or that they're capable of going with you to the board meeting and talking about the forecast for the business over the next 90 days. That's different. And if you don't equip them with that, your business is going to struggle.
100%. It's funny because earlier in my career, I was selling sales training programs, and we had a manager sales manager leadership training program, and nobody bought it. Nobody would buy it. And it's like an evergreen problem that people don't invest in their and it seems like you want the staff sergeants, you want the frontline sergeants to be the most highly trained individuals because they're leading small squadrons into battle, but it seems like, and maybe do you find this, that still today, we don't put enough emphasis on training frontline managers?
Oh, I see it all the time, Dave. And it's kind of like,
Crazy.
It's why I've decided that, I'm going to let Anthony Iannarino and Jeb Blunt and all, you guys are great at training the seller. I exist because I think that there is a whole world of sales leaders out there screaming, I just don't have it. And my CEO assumes I'm going to get it, but I don't know where to turn. And so I want to be that resource. And in fact, I don't do sales training. I just tell people, like when I get brought in and then they say, well, we got to train our salespeople. I'm like, well, you do, but I'm not doing it. There are so many other companies that are far better qualified at training salespeople. I'm here to make your leader better.
Nice. Okay. That's what we need, dude. And actually, just on a side note, I'm reading this book by John McMahon called The Qualified Sales Leader. You should definitely check it out.
So I've got a podcast that called Revenue Harvest that supports my book, Revenue Harvest, and John will be in season 2. John and I are kindred spirits. You're going to love that episode because, he and I are ex-college athletes and we just go back and forth. I mean, my production team that edits the interview said it's the only one in 2 seasons where they said, no edits. These guys they just nailed it. So you'll like that one.
Crushing it. Okay. So first we're getting your book, and then I would recommend this one. And just a quick side note, John McMahon, he came into when I was a sales manager at Glassdoor, and he ran a training for us where the whole training was a movie called 12 O'Clock High. And so he would show a clip of the movie and then do an exercise based on what we were watching in the movie. And I still remember, it was a terrific training. It's a great movie, and I definitely would recommend you look at it from the point of view of leadership training. So anyway, so that's my quick story. 12 O'Clock High, folks. We'll put the link in the description. So let me ask you this. As you're working with sales teams and you hear about struggles that they've had, what are some of the top things that you hear in the marketplace that sales and the SDR teams are struggling with these days?
Let's talk about one that I think is really relevant to the sales development teams. And that is this, maybe, and I might be bold here, but the beginning of the end of the legacy sales development role. And that's not to say that outbound is done, because I think that I'm more bullish on outbound now than I've ever been. But you're seeing the humble return of the phone. You're seeing an increased adoption and effective use of video. Email has never been less effective. And what we're used to, which is this like Aaron Ross, Mary Lou Tyler response rate, an email that used to be 8, then it was 5, and it's a certain number of new contacts put into a cadence a day. It's just not working. And so the sellers that had experience before we had all this specialization, what we, old dinosaurs, the full cycle reps, and the sales development reps that have a little bit of EQ, like the emotional intelligence enough to know, would I open this message? Would I reply to this? Does this even make sense to me? Those sellers are having far better success in building and closing pipeline because everybody just doesn't want an email right now. And so there's been this trend towards, well, you got to get out of the scripted messages and you've got to add personalization to it. And while I advocate that, yeah, that's a great starting point, what I'm telling folks now is that personalization is the price of entry. Like, don't even bother if you're going to personalize, but don't think that's enough. It is just the starting point. Relevancy is far more important. And let me give you some examples of the difference. So you can personalize it and say, hey, Dave, I loved your post about this, and I saw you went to this school, go whatever, go Ducks. Okay, that's personalization. But you better very quickly tell me why this email is going to make my life better. Because the brain, in its simplest form, goes to fight or flight at some point. Is this helping me, or is this hurting me? And really, it's danger is what the brain is looking for. And danger may seem like a bit of a dramatization, but distraction and irrelevance is danger, because it keeps you from doing something that you can be doing that's going to help you achieve your work goals and ultimately your career goals. So the brain is very quickly trying to figure out, is this danger or is this useful? And if you can have a really highly personalized message that very quickly becomes all about your product and service, and it's no longer relevant, and the brain puts it as danger, and it's done. And so you've got to be able to make your message relevant. And the only way to do that is slowing down. You got to go slow to go faster. It's doing more research, putting fewer contacts in your pipeline, but having better messaging. And you'll create pipeline faster if you just slow the heck down and think about what you're doing.
Okay. And so as an example, if you read your email that you're sending and you're like, no, I would not respond to this, or, your call script or something like that. And, someone who is coming in, as a newer seller, and they haven't been in the shoes of their prospect. So, they might be calling people that have 20 years of experience, right, in the industry. And they're just this guy who showed up for work, 6 months ago, and now he's calling, right? How do they go about bridging that gap to where they can write a message or write a script that sounds credible, but yet they don't have that, industry experience that the person has that might potentially, respond?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I was just talking about this with a team literally this morning in a sales training session with their manager, where it's like, you just lean into all that. You have empathy and you speak to it and say, hey, Dave, you've been in this business for 20 years and you're probably wondering, why in the world would I give Nigel 10 minutes of my time? And I get that. And that's why I'm reaching out to you. And that's the key thing. You have to, you don't argue, you just say, and that's why I'm reaching out to you. While I'm new, I still think that with your experience, you're going to be able to quickly determine if this service works well with what you're already doing. So I know you're busy. That's why I only need 5 minutes of your time for us to quickly determine if this is even going to be helpful for you or not. Tuesday is better or Thursday better. You just lean into all that.
Got it. And this is I'm just curious, like from a business perspective, if you're the buyer, is there value in the salesperson, the fact that the salesperson is working with a number of different companies, but the buyer is, they're kind of heads down working at their company. They don't get out much, especially now. There's no trade shows, there's no conferences, you're just sitting in your house, on a Zoom meeting. Is there value in the fact that the salesperson is talking to their peers every day?
Situationally,
What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Situationally. I think it's situational. Okay. I think if you work with Coca-Cola or you work with Google, or if you work, you fill in the blank, right? If it's something that's ubiquitous and everybody's going to get it, yeah. But if it's Johnny's brick and mortar company, it's just noise. It's just noise.
Yeah. So then we're back to, you have to understand, the buyer and their pain points and how you might be able to be useful to them, and then approach them in a way that is either kind of a yes or no then. When we're talking straight outbound, it's like, I get you, I get your world. Here's how we could potentially help. Can we talk for 5 minutes? Is that essentially the way that we have to think about it?
I think so. And this is why we need to talk.
Okay.
So it's like setting a clear This is why I suspect you'll receive value from talking to me.
Got it. Okay.
It's not this broad sweeping generalization of we help companies that struggle with, it's like, no, Dave, you are the CEO of a company that does this. And I know you struggle with this. If it's true, 5 minutes, I think I have an answer for you. And that requires research.
Right. Because if I am, if I happen to be struggling with that particular issue and someone calls me up and says that, then I would give them time. But if I'm not, or, it feels irrelevant, then it immediately goes into the waste paper basket. Right. So I guess we still have to deal with a lot of rejection in sales, is that fair to say?
Yeah. And I think that rejection, I was at Outbound this past week or 2 weeks ago down in Atlanta, and Jeb Blunt put on just a phenomenal clinic on using rejection. Every potential rejection you could imagine, this man was able to quickly spin that into a reason why you needed to pay attention. And a lot of it, I think, comes out of his book, Fanatical Prospecting. But the essence is like, I'm too busy. I don't have time to meet right now. I know you're really busy. And that's exactly why we need to meet. Because you're so busy, I can't help but wonder if you or anyone in your organization is giving this priority enough attention. That's why I want to manage it for you. So like every potential where we already have a vendor that does this for us. I know you have a vendor that does this, and I suspect things are going great. But in the rare case that something may not be going as well as it needs to, at least you'll have me as an extra resource. That's why we need to meet for 5 minutes. It's not arguing with the customer, but it's just recognizing that, look, you got to be different. And how you be different is listen, agree with them, and then kind of find the crack in the dam.
Right. And so, there's going to be that rejection. It's not, and so it could be that your skills are not up to par, as that sales professional, in that you haven't mastered all the objection handlers, that Jeb Blunt is talking about. But it could also be that it's just not the right time for that person that you're talking to. So do you find that salespeople take that personally and they sort of start to withdraw a little bit because they don't want to deal with all that rejection? Or do they bounce back and try to improve their skills, and handle those objections better?
I think the elite sales reps see it as a win, because that's exactly what it is. Rejection is a win because it's one of two things. Either it really is no, which is great. No is the second best answer. The worst thing you can have is someone string you along and keep kicking the can down the road. So at worst, it's the second best answer you could get. No matter what, it's a response. Okay. So it's an opportunity for you to say, okay, this isn't for you. Would you mind telling me why? And this is where sellers need to learn that oftentimes you're not losing deals because they went with a competitor. You're losing deals due to apathy. And apathy is no feeling or opinion about it whatsoever. So that means that they were kind enough to tell you no thanks, and you should be appreciative of that. But what you're asking them to do is not as important as some other initiative within the company that they need to devote time, energy, and resources to. You lose 90% of your deals to no decision, or a decision to talk to another vendor in another category about another problem in the business. And your job, when you get met with rejection in the form of an actual response, is to understand why this isn't a priority for the business now. Because it may not help you with this sale, but on the next one, you'll know how to make it more relevant.
Yeah. And it seems like the best salespeople out there are the ones that can qualify deals, quickly and understand. I mean, it's just, a lot of it comes with experience. I remember this one lady that when I was the SDR. She had been in the industry for like 30 years. And it was just hilarious, like going on sales calls with her because she could sniff out qualification in like 5 seconds, where somebody else would put the deal in the pipeline and, keep talking about it for 6 months and it was never going to close anyways. This lady could do it in like 5 minutes.
Exactly. And, there are ways in which to do that. And yeah,
it's amazing. Well, Nigel, dude, this has been so informative. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. If people want to pick up the book or they want to learn more about you, what's the best way to get that going?
Yeah, so you can get the book anywhere you get books. But if you go buy it from therevenueharvest.com, I'm giving it away for free. You just pay for shipping and handling. That's a fixed cost that no one gets around. You can go buy it at Amazon and they'll get it to you tomorrow and you'll pay, $18 or whatever, or you can go pay half that. I'll get it to you in a couple of days and sign it. So everybody that buys it from therevenueharvest.com gets a signed copy. So if you're interested in stuff like that, go get it.
Revenue Harvest, dude. Well, I wish you and everybody listening a bountiful harvest because that's what we're doing this for. So thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom on the Sales Development Podcast. We'll have you on again soon.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Development Podcast, the only audio forum 100% focused and dedicated to sales development, with your host, David Dulany. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube and take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes. Your support makes our show possible. If you are struggling with your sales development program, contact us at tenbound.com for a no-obligation exploratory call. Again, that's tenbound.com.